Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Robert Stickle. I'm also joined by my colleague Richard Evans. Richard will be today's presenter and will discuss the topic of connecting strategy and execution for OnePlan capabilities to support strategic portfolio management. This webinar is a new addition to our diverse library of strategic portfolio management videos that we have available on YouTube and our website. So if you enjoy this webinar, we welcome you to watch the other videos we have available there. And as always, I hope that today's presentation grants you some insight into the world of strategic portfolio management and gets you excited for the new developments happening within the industry and here at OnePlan. Thank you again. I'll now turn the presentation over to Richard.
Great, thanks, Robert. Hi, everyone. This is Richard. So one of the core missions of strategic portfolio management is better connecting strategy and execution across the enterprise. So in this presentation and demo, I'm going to show some tips for how you can use OnePlan to achieve that. I'm calling those tips or capabilities, I'm calling them guardrails because they're intended to keep you on the right safe track as you try and make decisions on your portfolio in a complex environment. Okay, so let's start with tip number one, or guardrail number one, and that is using strategic themes and outcomes. The purpose of strategic themes is to enable all work and teams and assets in the enterprise to have a connection to enterprise goals in a clear way. And the purpose of outcomes is to be able to measure in business terms the results of our work. Now, we manage this in OnePlan using OKRs, or objectives and key results. Let's take a look at that in action in OnePlan. Okay, so I want to go to my strategy here on the left-hand nav, and here is where I can manage objectives, meaning business goals, and also the key results or metrics and measures associated with them. Now, how that might transpire is at the highest level, and there are many levels in this scenario, I might have established some enterprise objectives that I've received, and they may be a list that looks a bit like this, and these may or may not be written in a great way or even with measures. So step number one is often just interpreting those initial enterprise objectives and capturing them in a more robust way. If I just pick on one of these objectives, you can see as well, OnePlan, we have a ability to have key results associated with them. And if I just drill into a particular key result, you can see that I've got lots of options for how I might put workflow around that key result, and also how I can measure outcomes or key results in different ways, with financial percentages, headcount numbers, all manner of options for dealing with business metrics relating to a key result. And I can also associate these key results and objectives to various items across the enterprise, not just a particular single thing. I can associate objectives and key results all over the place if I want. More on that to come. All right, so that's enterprise objectives. Of course, the next thing I would probably want to do is land those same objectives by portfolio and start that process off. So first step, simple step, might be simply to identify which portfolio is associated with those things. Of course, at this point, I'll be building out more specific objectives for my portfolio, as well as key results. Nice thing in OnePlan is I can associate key results or business measures in different portfolios or in different plans, associate them back to the same objective if I like. But the key is, good place to start with landing these at the portfolio level, because if I do that, if you think about what we're trying to achieve in portfolio management often is, especially in strategic portfolio management, is trying to achieve a view of a portfolio in terms of its deliverables. So that would be things like milestones, releases, features. Those are deliverables. Obviously budgets, but now we can also, when we're doing, for example, strategic portfolio reviews, we can also measure outcomes for that portfolio, which are going to be different, of course, and arguably more meaningful than deliverables. So you can see both side by side. You've got both to be able to make decisions on when you're having these key reviews around what should we change. And just to illustrate that, again, going back to OnePlan and the strategy section, I've got dashboards in here on my key results and objectives, which can look at all manner of slicing and dicing across portfolios, across product teams, across projects and so on. But key is here, I can actually, as part of my portfolio data, in addition to deliverables and budget, etc., I can also have dashboards now that show me where I am in those different portfolios regarding these business metrics or outcomes, whether they're about cost savings or whether they're about headcount growth or all manner of metrics. One other thing I should just stress as well is another feature in OnePlan that helps with this is the visualizer to really sort of see these connections in action, especially helpful when you're doing planning across the enterprise. So in strategic portfolio management, our portfolios can include projects, of course, but also many other elements such as products and applications, etc. If we're really trying to connect strategy and execution, we might be thinking more broadly than just our projects and programs. If I take a product here, so here is the Customer Hub product team's plan, and like any other plan, Customer Hub product team has got the usual things in OnePlan like details and financials and work planning. The thing I want to show you is part of the reporting package now, which is this thing visualizer. So if I go into visualizer, first step is I can see predecessors and successors with similar plans. Fine. But here's where it gets interesting. I can also now map across and beyond plan types or beyond elements to really see and understand for planning purposes all of these connections across different elements. So in this example, I started with my Customer Hub, which is my product team. Now I can see all of the different projects or epics related to that are going on, and in fact their status, and red, yellow, green. And I can also see how this ties back to a significant objective and any number of key results associated with that as well. So that is in action, establishing those clear lines of sight between strategy and execution beyond just projects in this example. All right, so that's strategic themes. That's measuring outcomes and how valuable that is at the portfolio level. Let's have a look at another example. This is a really simple thing that's often overlooked. It's there in OnePlan is roadmaps, and simply the purpose of a roadmap is to help people visualize work in progress as well as work in the pipeline, because there's a lot of evidence that shows that simply by visualizing those things, it really bolsters your ability to ultimately make good decisions and get a good feel for what capacity implications are going on right now. So let's just have a quick look at a roadmap just to illustrate that point. If I go to my portfolio on the left, and I will pick roadmap view. Now, one of the good, that's a busy roadmap, but one of the good practices, I think, when you're thinking about building roadmaps is, well, a couple of things. Make sure we've got on there our active work as well as our proposed work. So you can see clearly in this case, the proposed items are gray, the actives are blue. So that's important. And the other thing is, in this view, I have restricted this particular view to just my strategic initiatives, of which I've got a small handful. And from there, I can add, projects, epics, applications, whatever, in the container of those strategic initiatives. So that gives me the ability to really establish those large items, initiatives, which I know are very stable, perhaps for years. And then those particular work items like epics and projects that I do in relation to them, those are discretionary. Those I can add later over time. So that gives me my framework. Of course, with portfolios, you want all kinds of slicing and dicing, so you can group your portfolios by strategic theme or by ownership, or however we want to do that. And an example of a next level roadmap as I develop this thing over time is to also have additional projects and epics within the containers of those initiatives. Also, I can see in here, of course, dependency strings, that's helpful, and milestones and so on. And even at this point, I can be managing my items, whether they are extremely simple plans or mature plans, and that includes establishing dependencies. So roadmap, easily overlooked, but very powerful and an important guardrail. Number 3, portfolio workflow. The purpose of portfolio workflow is really to efficiently and quickly go from somebody having an idea or a request for something valuable to the point where we can actually start work on it. So it's these stages we put into our overall portfolio system should be designed to be speedy, but balance that with rigor so that we make good informed decisions. And in short, that's how we measure flow, is that efficiency path. Now, one of the frameworks for portfolio workflow I like a lot is the lean portfolio management framework, which I have found works in agile portfolio management scenarios and traditional non-agile portfolio management scenarios. So it seems to work very well in all kinds of environments as well. That particular workflow starts with a funnel, which is where you initially grab your ideas or requests. And one thing I should show you is a new OnePlan app called the Requester app, which is specifically to keep that process simple and accessible. So this is what the funnel or request app looks like in OnePlan. The idea here is you can now extend the ability to make requests or ideas to anyone across the enterprise, including all of those people who wouldn't necessarily be using the OnePlan system. So it really democratizes the ability to establish the funnel or the very front end of an intake process that anyone can have access to if they've got the app. It's a nice, simple experience, and I can have simple forms just to capture however I want to configure that key data in this initial funnel stage. So there's my item fleet automation entered. Okay. Next step in my workflow would be some kind of triage or review of that item. Let's go back to OnePlan again. Um, we manage intake usually in the My Ideas section here on the left. So this is where I'll be managing that flow. Now, you can manage ideas and intake in a list view. I like to manage this stuff in a board because it gives me that extra dimension to be able to work with, and visualizing helps me make decisions. Now, as I've configured this one, if I'm following the lean portfolio management framework, my next step after the funnel, after the ideas come in, is called review. And the review is normally a very quick hit, often by someone who's representing the business group or the product area or whatever it is of the actual requesting team, who can do a quick triage. And that might be something really simple. So in this example, I have set up a board for someone in the role of intake review. And all they have in my example here is to take an item and do that quick triage. Does it make sense? In which case, quick, finger in the air, high, medium, or low. So I would take my item in the backlog here, fleet automation, and I could just drag it into a quick categorization like that. Maybe that's as simple as it needs to be for me as a reviewer. Okay, the next step in a review process, or rather an intake process, would be perhaps an analyze stage. And in an analyze stage, we are going into more detail. And so you'd often have a different person doing the analyze stage. Perhaps you would be certainly building out more information on that item to bring it forward for decision making. So again, if I go back into my backlog, just an example of what that might look like. If I go into the details of that and see how that's progressing as an item, now it's in analyze, I might, for example, be building out a business case for that thing, certainly more details on its ownership, maybe some budget. You can see I've got a check mark here because that's triggering a workflow. So think about the opportunities here in the analyze stage for having workflows as well, to send things to different people based on different criteria or checking boxes. That's all possible too. The other thing we've done here as part of my framework in this example is to create a scoring system. It's often helpful to have some kind of strategic value scoring system in place, especially for when you're trying to differentiate between two similar opportunities and you're trying to create a tiebreaker in your system. And the one I like is this one. Again, comes with OnePlan, but this is the WSGIF scoring system, which is a nice, easy way for and easily adopted for people to who are sponsoring something to give a feel for its relative business value for the people who are potentially doing the work to assess its job size, and that results in a weighted shortest job first score. WSGIF, basically the highest score wins the tiebreak. So that's useful. The other thing we can do is add any number of forms and fields, including associations with other elements or plan types perhaps as well. Okay, so I built out my fleet automation opportunity. I've now got associated key results with it, which is helpful, and budget and so on, so I can move that forward in my workflow like that. Okay, so that's a quick few tips on using boards for initial stages of workflow, as well as the request wrap, funnel, review, analyze stages, building out this information. The next step, which is key after this, would be capacity and sequencing. So the next stage of a strategic decision-making process is figuring out, okay, should I do this thing? And if so, when should we do this thing? We often talk about prioritization, the end game of prioritization in practice is often when are we going to do it? Are we doing it this year, this month, next quarter? And often to help do that, we need assessment of business value as well as an understanding of our capacity to do the item. So that's how we'll determine sequencing. Let's have a look at that. Now, I also like, for this stage in the workflow, which is our sort of planning and sequencing stage, I like to use a board as well. You can use list views here too. Now, in these examples I want to show, I just want to step away from traditional project management or project portfolio management for a second, because in strategic portfolio management, the assumption is you're not necessarily doing project management. It's good if you are. I mean, that's a good capability to have, and that's of course how you're going to be able to track deliverables amongst many other things. Now, when it comes to understanding capacity for sequencing, if you are doing project management and you are pretty good at those kind of disciplines, then you can be using all of those great tools in OnePlan for resource capacity planning, managing teams and headcounts and roles and all of those features that help you with that. But that's often a quite advanced capability for some groups, especially if they're not doing project management. So I'll show you just a couple of examples of figuring out capacity without going into all the detail of resource planning. Now, in this example, I have configured my board by quarters. So the scenario is I'm doing quarterly based planning, quarterly reviews of my portfolio, and we're planning chunks of work, epics, projects, whatever. We're planning chunks of work in size of quarters. And in my board view here, what I've set as my capacity constraint is actually budget. And if you've ever played around with this feature here, constraints in OnePlan, it allows you to establish different constraints in boards, which will then helpfully turn red, green, yellow when you're going over or under these constraints. So in this case, I've set myself a budget for my work for the year of starting with Q1 700,000, Q2 1.5 million, and so on. So I'm going to use that as my capacity constraint. And what that means is when I look at my different items here, in fact, let's bring in our fleet automation items from the backlog. So this one we groomed earlier, and you can see it's got a WSJF score of 5.88. We know what strategic themes it's relating to. That's important. Compared to some of these others, it's got a pretty good WSJF score, meaning that might influence my thought to do it sooner rather than later. Also got these dependency strings, by the way, on this board to help me understand relationships between start and finish, so I don't do things in the wrong order. But just taking my fleet automation thing, I would like to do that because of its score in Q1, ideally, because of its strategic theme and because of its WSJF score and so on. Now that clearly puts me over budget now for Q1. So what I might be looking at now is something with a lower score or strategic relevance right now, and I might be moving that item out into a later quarter like that to balance the book. So now I've got balanced budget within capacity, which is nice. So that's one example of using budget as your constraint for quarterly planning. So balancing value with a constraint of budget. Another one that's helpful when you're thinking about planning for a team, in addition to budget, here's an alternative view of the world, which is planning by story points, or stories in this case. So epic portfolio management and agile disciplines, when you get good at those, of course, you can be estimating a piece of work in terms of story points. You can over time get a good feel for a particular team how many story points they can execute during a typical quarter. And there's some nice rules of thumb for how you start off that before you know anything to help you with that estimation. In this case, I've taken it even one step more simple than that and just talked about numbers of requirements as a very simple measure of capacity. But certainly, story points would be a more agile and more disciplined way of doing this. But the principle's the same, and you do both in OnePlan. So in this case, I have established that my teams can do roughly, or my estimates, which I'll refine over time, can do roughly 50 per quarter, and I can ramp up over the year as I improve my velocity, perhaps to a lot more in Q4. But you can see in this example, I'm also in budget or in capacity limits. And in fact, I've got so much capacity in terms of work now for Q1, I could also consider looking at other things later and bringing them forward. You know, the things like this with a higher Worcester score, I can think about bringing forward because I've got capacity to do so. So now I can shuffle things around to meet that story capacity or story points capacity. Okay, good. So let's just wrap this up with a summary of what we looked at today. Today we looked at connecting strategy and execution in OnePlan and some tips or guardrails for doing that. The first one was using strategic themes and outcomes using the OKRs feature and also the visualizer in OnePlan. We looked at that simple but effective tool of roadmaps so that you can visualize work in progress and upcoming work. We looked at establishing a portfolio workflow. I showed some examples from the lean portfolio management configured in OnePlan using boards, which is a nice way to do things. The review role, the analyze role, building out more detail. And finally, we looked at capacity and sequencing as that final step for making strategic decisions. And I showed you an example of using boards and quarterly based planning and how you can certainly use those resource planning features in OnePlan. But if you're not ready to do that, or you're doing different kinds of work and planning, for example, for an agile product team, you could be using other capacity constraints such as budget and story points. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.